Let's take a quick look at two problems from Bach, Velman, and DeVoe, Chapter 13, about experiments and observational studies. So number 10 posits the following situation. Researchers have linked an increase in the incidence of breast cancer in Italy to dioxin released by an industrial accident in 1976. The study identified 981 women who lived near the site of the industrial explosion and were under age 40 at the time. 15 of the women had developed breast cancer at an unusually young average age of 45. Medical records showed that these women had heightened concentrations of dioxin in their blood, and that each tenfold increase in dioxin level was associated with a doubling of the risk of breast cancer. From Science News, August 3rd, 2002. So first of all, here's the questions that they ask. Is it an observational study or an experiment? Well, it's definitely an observational study. This was not something where they picked out a situation and controlled it. It's in fact a retrospective, go away. It's a retrospective study. It's not saying, well, we're going to do something to a group of people and then follow them over the future. Retrospective means looking at past events and their effect. So it's fairly straightforward. Okay, the subjects studied and how they were selected. Okay, they were these 981 women, Italian women, if we want to be more precise, living near the site. Okay, so they were selected because they were women and they were living near that site. Okay, so what's the parameter of interest? Well, it looks like the incidence of breast cancer, and it also looks like the average age actually might be of interest. So it might actually be both the incidence of breast cancer and the age of onset of the breast cancer. Okay, so they mention both of those. And the nature and scope of the conclusion the study can reach. Okay, well, a lot of that is about what are some issues with how confident we can be. It's certainly if you read a newspaper article like this, you immediately jump to the conclusion, well, looks like the dioxin caused the breast cancer. Bad thing. Let's ban dioxin. Not actually an unreasonable conclusion, but not necessarily justified by this one study. Okay. The one really key thing is that there's no randomization at all or control. We are not carefully separating into two groups, one who are exposed to a certain treatment and one that are not, because it's not an actual experiment. There's no randomization or control, so a big possibility of lurking variables. Okay. It might well be that there's something else in this particular area that is causing the breast cancer. It's not clear if it's this particular chemical. It's known that this chemical is nasty in high concentrations, but were they really exposed to enough to actually cause breast cancer? Maybe some other factor, some other cause is at the heart of this. Okay, so not really possible to draw certain conclusions from this alone. Okay, certainly could be part of a puzzle, definitely. But that's one of the big weaknesses of an observational study. Maybe these people, maybe there's some other chemical that was causing this or something else. Okay, let's look at 19. Athletes who had suffered hamstring injuries were randomly assigned to one of two exercise programs. Those who engaged in static stretching returned to sports activity in a mean of 37.4 days. Standard deviation on that is 27.6 days. Those assigned to a program of agility and trunk stabilization exercises returned to sports in a mean of 22.2 days. Standard deviation is 8.3 days on that. Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy, 2004. Okay, so now this one was definitely an experiment. They didn't just look at what happened and describe it. It's an experiment. We've got athletes who suffered hamstring injuries. They were assigned to two exercise programs. There's some sort of real experimental design going on here. Okay, the subjects studied are athletes with hamstring injuries. Okay, and notice these questions are different because it's an experiment, so the questions that are relevant are different for this one. Factors and levels. Okay, well, there's only one factor here. It's a pretty simple experimental design. The factor was which stretching or which exercise program, I guess we could say. Which exercise program, and there's two levels, namely the static stretching versus the agility and trunk stabilization exercises. Okay, so the number of treatments is all the different permutations of all different factors and levels that you can have. When there's only one factor, it's just the number of levels, just two. Okay, this would be more complicated if there were different factors. So maybe if you had the which stretching you did, two possible stretchings, and then some people drank Gatorade and some people drank water. Then there would be two choices for each, and it would be a total of 4 treatments. Okay, so this is going to be bigger when there's kind of when there's multiple factors involved. The response variable measured. Well, the only thing that's reported is how long it took to return to sports activity. Okay, so time to return to sports activity. Okay, and that's a nice quantitative variable. Okay, and they're reporting, in particular, the mean in this example. Now, they've got the mean and the standard deviation, so they probably have other data. If we wanted to go back and ask these people what was the median, what was the Q1, what was the interquartile range, they'd probably know that. And so the response variable is the time. The particular parameter that's being reported here, the two parameters that are being reported here that they seem to be trying to get at are mean and standard deviation. Okay, so the design, this is something we haven't talked about all the possibilities here. For example, matched we haven't talked about. It's not completely clear. No, it is clear because there's really only two. They just say randomly assigned to one of two. Okay, so it looks like completely randomized. There's no evidence of blocking, and there's no clear reason why there should be blocking. Okay, so looks like completely randomized. Nature and scope of the conclusion the study can reach. Okay, well, let's look at it. We've got a controlled experiment with we're assuming the randomization is done well. Okay, so if the randomization was done well. Oh, another thing I think I forgot to put in here. Forgot to ask. Let's call this F prime. Is it blind? Okay, that's always a good thing. Is it blind from the point of view of the experimental units, the people who are doing, who are the subjects, let's say, or from the point of view of the people doing the experiment? Well, it doesn't seem like either. It's very hard to have a blind exercise program. If they're assigned to static stretching, they know they're doing static stretching. If they're assigned to agility and trunk stabilization, they know that. So some things are very hard to make blind. There's famous examples, though, where, like with surgical procedures, they actually do fake surgery on people in order to actually get a blind experiment, which is pretty amazing. So no, it's not a blind experiment. So if the randomization was done well, then we can probably conclude, if we look at these numbers involved, that mean 37.4 days, that's quite a bit more than 22.2. And now this standard deviation is pretty big. There's a really wide spread. So between plus or minus 1 standard deviations, it's 10 to like 65 days. And that lower end of the range does overlap with the 22.2. Whereas this guy, the standard deviation notice is much smaller. So this is like 14 to 30 within plus or minus 1 standard deviation. But still, that's a pretty significant difference. Okay, that there was a statistically significant difference in the treatments. Does really seem like the agility and strength stabilization did better. Remember, statistically significant means something very specific. It means that we probably wouldn't see this difference randomly. Okay, let's put a little question mark there because we'd like to know what the sample size was. If it was just 2 athletes in each of the treatments, then we really couldn't say that too well at all. But if it's 100 in each, then these numbers are more convincing. That it would be very weird. It'd be almost impossible for it just to be randomly that these guys got better so much quicker if it wasn't really better for them. Okay, so this means not due to randomness. Okay, so it looks pretty good for this one because assuming that it's as good as advertised. Okay,